Greeting online students. Welcome to Lecture 4. I'm going to talk today in this lecture about form, the use of slash notation and slash rhythm, which there are very important differences in, and we're going to look at inverting chords, and as the lecture progresses, there'll be a lot more detail about seventh chords. I'm just going to touch on it lightly here. So, here we have a discussion of form. Now, why does form matter? Form matters because as a producer, you want to know if I have an A section followed by another A section, okay, that's the same music. Do I want to change things? Do I want to add more percussion? Do I want my dynamic markings do I want the music to get louder or softer? Those are the kinds of considerations that form are important to help you formulate a nice musical setting. All right, so within form, basically form is how a piece is constructed. It's the parts or the building blocks of a structure. It reveals how the piece is put together. You're going to basically look for clear, distinct sections and fairly obvious relationships between easily defined sections. Basically, just compare, look for similarities and differences. In both your Project 1 and Project 2, there's a requirement to show the form of the piece using boxed letters. Capital letters are used to mark sections in the analysis of form, which I just said. Your assignment indicates you should use box letters for analytical form marking. The use of capital, just plain capital letters in form analysis, this shouldn't be confused with rehearsal letters that are often used to mark off the sections of a work, but those are just to facilitate rehearsal. Oftentimes, if there's a big A section, it might be marked A as a rehearsal letter. The fact that it may also be a structural A section is purely coincidence. So be careful, don't confuse the two. They're related, but they're not the same thing. Rehearsal letters do not necessarily reflect the musical structure. They're used to facilitate rehearsing the music in logical sections. So here are some common forms. One of the most common is same, same, different, same, almost always known as AABA. In FUM, you did have to do some charting, and I'm sure you noticed that lots of pop songs were maybe 8 bars, repeated 8 bars with different words, a bridge or release section, which was a different B, and then back to a repetition of the A section. Sometimes there were pre-choruses, introductions, outros, maybe little instrumental sections. But overall, the AABA form is a very popular form. For example, if we sing through Old MacDonald Had a Farm, Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, A. And on this farm he had some dogs, E-I-E-I-O. Different words, but same music. For all intents and purposes, that's A-A. With a woof woof here and a woof woof there, here a woof, there a woof, everywhere a woof woof, that is not the same as the first 2 phrases I sang. That's different. That's your B section right there. Last phrase, Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, just like the first 2. So that's a classic AABA. Extremely simplified, obviously, because it's a children's, little folk tune. But that still is overall, even in larger pieces, even pop music as such, AABA is a very popular format to follow. Some other common forms are ABA, known as ternary form, just simply means you have same, different, and same again. That's ternary. Another common form is binary. It just means you have a real obvious A section where things kind of are cohesive together in that section, and a different enough section where you're thinking, that's not the same section, it doesn't really seem to be related, it goes well with it, but it doesn't have the same pieces and parts and sound very much like A. That's binary, an A and a B section. Again, for the piece you're looking at that you're analyzing, just find clearly definable sections and compare them and look for the same or different relationships. How do they compare to one another? Another common form, believe it or not, is called through composed. You see that right here. Through composed simply means there aren't any sections that are enough alike to call them a repetition of the same section. There may be clearly recognizable sections, but they don't repeat in a way closely resembling one another to say the section was an easily recognized repetition. Okay? So think about those. They will actually help you in the end. Knowing the form of a piece will help you make nice, interesting musical decisions as a producer. Another important point you have coming up in your Project 1, it is a chord chart that makes use of slash notation. When you did charting in FUM, you didn't have to go to this detail, but this is a chord chart and you need to use slashes or slash rhythm where appropriate, and these are two different types of notation that are different and have a specific intention and purpose for each. So here we have an example of slash notation. This is an excerpt of a few measures of the entire chord chart. What we don't see is there would have been a treble clef. It would have been written in treble clef. There would be a key signature as needed, and of course a time signature. This would have been 4/4. These slashes represent the fact that 4 pulses, 4 beats are felt in every measure as the music goes by. This G chord here, the symbol right over the first slash, says the harmony of the G chord should be heard on the first measure and continue to be heard throughout the measure in accordance with the appropriate style and the musician's interpretation of what to play in that chord, how many times to play the chord. And I'll be more specific in just a moment. In the next measure, we have a C chord that should be sounded on the first beat, but on the 4th beat, very specifically, we change the harmony to a D chord. Now, when you look at notation like this, slash notation gives the musician reading the chart very important information. 1, the indicated harmony is present for the same number of beats that the slash notation represents. In this case, they represent 4 beats. And it also says that the harmony should be present on the specific beat of the measure where the chord symbol is located. So in this case specifically, I have G showing up on a downbeat. It lasts for the whole measure. C showing up on a downbeat, changing to the D chord harmony on the 4th beat of that measure. That is very specific. The musician in this case, please note this, the musician is free to choose any appropriate rhythmic figure to sustain that harmony. Professional musician will know their instrument, its capabilities and characteristics, and many musical styles. So, guitar player, keyboard player. Say I'm the keyboard player, I'm looking at this, and I don't have to go, because they're slashes, I don't have to just play 4 beats of G, 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 G. When I look at this, that gives me the freedom. I am free to choose any appropriate rhythmic figure to sustain that harmony. So that means in this full measure of G, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, G, G, G. I didn't play 4 beats. That slash notation gives me the freedom to choose a rhythm that's appropriate to the style of the song I'm playing. When I get to the next measure, I'm going to have to get the D on the 4th beat, but I can still choose appropriate rhythms for the C for the first 3 beats. For example, 1, 2, second measure, here I go, and 1, 2, 3, 4. I had to play the D right on the money on the 4th beat. So from the beginning of this, I am free to go 2, 3, 4. G, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So as you can see and hear, I made up a rhythm that I thought was appropriate to the style I was imagining. So a whole lot more going on when a musician chooses that. But this notation gives the musician the freedom to choose an appropriate rhythmic figure to sustain the harmony that's shown there. Again, the professional musician will know their instrument. They'll know what's appropriate. As a producer, you may ask them to do something different, to choose a different way to play the harmony through the measure. But generally speaking, the musician will know their instrument. So, when given slash notation, they may choose the rhythmic interpretation of the harmony, unlike slash rhythm. Now this is slash rhythm, this is different. It looks just like regular notated rhythm, just that as you can see the notes are flattened, and if they need a stem, there's a stem there. This represents a whole note, so of course there's no stem involved. But it's not a regular looking whole note, nor is it slashes. It represents the way the rhythm would have looked, except it's either made into a square shape or flattened down and stems used where appropriate. When you use slash rhythm, you take away that freedom. The performer must play the harmony in the rhythm shown, and they have no choice. If you notate that, they must do it that way. So in this case, this example would now be played. Again, I'm missing, this is an excerpt. I am again missing the 4/4, the key signature. time signature, that kind of thing. Oh, I said that, and the treble clef, sorry. So if I were to play this, I would have to play this exact rhythm. I have to play 4 quarter notes, 2 quarter notes, a half note, and hold that E for a whole note without sounding the chord again. I have to hold it out. So here you go, from here. 1, 2, 3, 4. My thumb's in the way, I couldn't play it. Sorry, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I played the exact rhythm that you see there, and that is what slash rhythm means. You don't get a choice anymore. No choice given. Unlike here, where the musician does have a choice with slash notation. Slash rhythm, no choice. You have to do that exact rhythm. Now down here, we see a mix of both. Here's slash notation, just straight through. I can play the chords in any way that's stylistically appropriate to sustain an F harmony through that measure, to sustain a C harmony through that measure, and an F harmony on the first 2 beats any way I want. But when I get right here, I am told when it gets to the 3rd beat, I have no choice. I have to play a B flat on beat 3, hold it through beat 3, the down beat of 4, and hit the and of 4 with an F chord. Then I'm going to tie it over to the first beat of the next measure. Over here, I go back to slash rhythm. I go back to slash notation, and I can play the chords in any correct style I'd like. But right here is slash rhythm. I have to execute that rhythm exactly with the harmony the way it is delineated. Frequently, this is referred to when a whole band does the whole thing like this. It's called a kick. For example, all the horns and the keyboard player and the bass player all play this rhythm together. Maybe not the drummer. Maybe yes, maybe no. But a large number of members of a band play a rhythm all together. It's called a kick, and it would have to be notated like that in a chord chart so that it's clear everybody has to do this rhythm with that harmony. So this example would be like this from the beginning. 1, I can play anything I want for the first 2 measures. Part of the 3rd measure right here, I got to play exactly what's there. Here it comes. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. You do that again since I slipped up. Here it is again from here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. I used inversions to make it easier for my hand, but I was playing the correct chords. This is very helpful to make things clear to your musicians exactly what you want played. Let's move ahead and look at some chord qualities that you'll be coming up when you look at your Aurelia 2 assignment this week. These are the qualities of 7th chords you'll be coming up to listening for in Aurelia. We're looking at major 7 chords, dominant 7 chords, and minor 7 chords. There are 5 types of 7th chords. What we are missing here is the half diminished 7 and the fully diminished 7. As you go forward in this lecture, there is the complete review of how all the chords are structured when you make them into 7th chords in a diatonic setting in a major key. So be sure to check that out. That's coming up. For now, I would just like to look very briefly. That's coming up. It's in the next lecture, next part of the lecture. I want to look at inversions to be sure you know how to do this. Almost all of you, I'm sure, do know how to invert triads. I just want to insert this so it's very clear as to exactly what you should be doing. So here it is written out. You have seen probably the figured bass back in MUA, Musical Structure and Analysis, that you had to work through. But let's just go over it very quickly. Here is a C triad in root position, correct? If I invert it, I'm taking the lowest note, the C, the root of the chord, and I'm putting it up on top. C is still the root. I just moved it from the bottom up to the top. So now I have the 3rd component of the chord, root 3rd, 5th, the building blocks, the components of the chord. Now I'm putting the root up on top, and I now have from the lowest to highest 3rd, 5th root. The interval from the 3rd up to the root, the 3rd up to the root of that chord, is now a 6th. The interval from The third up to the fifth from E to G is a third. That is first inversion. That's why it's also known as a 6-3, and a lot of times the 3 is left out. It's not really necessary. The only other option you can get is a 6-4. So if you just say 6, they know you mean 6-3. So the 3 is frequently left out. So we have an interval of a third and a sixth. That's why it's called a 6-3 chord, and it is also known as first inversion. Most people do refer to them by inversion. If they're talking about inversions, they generally don't go with this, the figured bass. This is very analytical, and when you are speaking analytically, that stuff only goes underneath the staff as analytical discussions. You don't put chord symbols down there. You only put chord symbols above the staff as regular chord symbols that most musicians are used to reading. Most musicians are going to want to see music with chord symbols. They don't really care about the analysis as such. They may be internally analyzing it so they can play better, but they're not going to worry about seeing an analysis. It's left out of chord charts and lead sheets and things. You don't put analysis in. So let's continue on. Let's see what happens at second inversion. So here is my first inversion C chord. I'm going to now invert the chord again. I'm going to take the low note and put it on top. That happens to be the component of the third of the chord. I'm going to put that up on top. That leaves me with the component of the fifth of the chord, the root of the chord, and the third of the chord. What's the distance from G to E? That is a sixth. G to E, there's that sixth. From G to C is a fourth. That's why this is called analytically a 6-4 chord, more commonly referred to as a second inversion chord. So here's the root position. Put that low note up on top. I get a first inversion, or a 6-3. Put the low note up on top again. I get a second inversion, or a 6-4, because it's a sixth and a fourth. Okay? Now, you may be wondering, well, why didn't I specify what kind of sixth? Is that major or minor sixth? We don't care about whether it's a major or minor sixth, because when you are inverting chords, the tradition that this came from back in the day of Johann Sebastian Bach and his group of composers at that time, in the early 1600s, they assumed you were staying in a key and did not leave it, that you stayed diatonic. So when you were told to invert a chord, for example, if you were told to invert a C chord and they said, this song is in the key of C, so you can't use anything else except the notes that are in the key of C. You have to stay diatonic. So when you invert, you automatically know there's no sharps or flats because you're in the key of C. And when you invert, if I tell you it's a 1 chord in the key of C and it's first inversion, you don't really need to worry about that being whether it's a major, minor, sixth. You just know you're supposed to have C on top because you're staying diatonic. Let's take a look now. Triad inversions are pretty simple. Let's take a look at seventh chord inversions, okay? Of course, we have 4 notes now. We're going to end up with another option to invert. And again, that's a very similar mindset of operating through these. If you were given a chord, it was assumed you were in a specific key. So now things have changed. Back here, we were just looking at a C chord, and I said, let's pretend we're in the key of C major, and that's the 1 chord. Easy enough. Well, now I have a C7. A C7 does not belong in the key of C. There is no B flat. A C7 is the 5-7 chord when you are in the key of F. Now, when we look at examples like this, that is not the key signature, that B flat. That is an accidental written in to make sure we wrote the chord correctly. We're just writing examples without being in a key. That's why I'm pointing out to you that C7 comes from the key of F. Here's F major. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. The B is flat ordinarily. That makes it the correct major scale. So of course, when I form the 5 chord, the 5-7 chord, more specifically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, C, E, G, B flat is in the key signature. So C7 comes from the key of F. Now let's look at how we invert that chord. Here's your C7 in root position right here. C, E, G, B flat. Pretty easy, right? If we take that C, put that up on top, what's the distance from E to C? That's a sixth. The distance from E to B flat, it's a fifth. Now that's not a perfect fifth, but again, because we're told we have to stay diatonic in a specific key, in this key we'd be in the key of F, we don't really care that that is a diminished fifth. We just know that it's a fifth. When we stay diatonic, we have no choice but to choose B flat, but we still went 5 letter names, E, F, G, A, B flat. E, F, G, A, B, but the B is flat. So we still went 5 letter names. It's a fifth. Yes, technically it is a diminished fifth or a tritone, but we're not concerned with that because of the fact that we have to stay in a key, and we're in the key of F. The C7 comes from the key of F. So since, and E to G is a third. So since we have the combination of an interval of a sixth, a fifth, and a third, that's called, the first inversion of a dominant seventh chord is called technically a 6-5-3, but again, they drop the 3 out. Most commonly, analytically, it's called a 6-5 chord, more commonly known as a first inversion. So let's flip that up. Let's take the E and put that one on top now. Now we have a second inversion. G to B flat is a third. G to C is a fourth. G to E is a sixth. And again, we don't care about the intervals because we have no choice. We can only use the notes that we know are in the key of F. We have to stay diatonic. So we end up with a distance of a sixth, G to E, a fourth, that one happens to be perfect, a fourth, G to C, and a third, G to B flat. Again, we don't care if it's major, minor, third. We have to stay diatonic. We know it. We went 3 letter names. It's a third. The second inversion is called a 6-4-3. Usually this 6 is dropped out. It's usually just called a 4-3. That's second inversion. Analytically called a 4-3. When we're talking about inversions, most commonly people are going to say it's a second inversion of a dominant seventh chord, in this case C7. We got one more inversion because we have 4 notes, so we can go one further inversion. We take the G, put that up on top. There it is right there. We end up with B flat, C, E, and G. B flat to C is only the interval of a second. We don't care what kind. We have to stay diatonic. B flat to E is a fourth, and again, that's an augmented fourth. But we don't care about that. A tritone again, we have to stay diatonic. B flat to G is a sixth. So the third inversion is analytically referred to as a dominant 4-2 chord or just a 2. This inversion is a 4-2 or just a 2. And it's more commonly referred to as a third inversion. Okay? Don't forget, if you ever have questions, you really need to message your instructor, show up at the weekly online sessions, or attend the reboots, or every evening from 5 to 9 p.m. is a music helpline. All that information is in FSO in the course. Now, there's what all those inversions look like. Let's actually do it on a keyboard so that you're not confused. Here's root position, C7. C, E, G, B flat. I take that C, put it up on top. I get my second item, a first inversion, called a 6-5, E, G, B flat, C. This is a 6, that's a fifth, that's a third. That's why it's called a 6-5 or first inversion. Let's move on to the second inversion. I put the E up on top. I get G, B flat, C, E. That's a second inversion, dominant seventh chord. I have a third, a fourth, and a sixth, but it's called a 4-3, as we discussed. Here's the last third inversion, where I take that G and put that up on top. Now I get B flat, C, E, G. My hands in an eye position. I would not play more like this, but I don't want to block. I want you to be able to see what I'm playing. B flat, C, E, G. So I have a second, a fourth, and a sixth. That's why it's called a 6-4-2, more commonly a 4-2 or just a 2. Everyday people are talking about inversions. They'll call it the third inversion of a dominant seventh chord. Now, having gone through those inversions, not really critical for you to know, I just want you to see where these analytical forms came from and why we still have them as a form of analysis to see what's going on. Back in Bach's day, the harpsichord player only got a bass line and a bunch of numbers. Let me show you. So here we have, and keep in mind if you tuned into the first several lectures at the beginning of the month, when I was talking about common practice period harmony in Bach's time, they didn't have key signatures and things figured out. Nobody agreed on how to do it. So I can't even tell what these clefs are. There's 5 flats in this spot, but only 4 there. The clefs are unclear. The rules and regulations were not set into place clearly yet. There wasn't a uniform decision on how to do things until a century or so later. But just so you know, they probably, if they worked with Bach, they knew what he meant. But here you go. Here, right here, that's a note with a 6-5. That means that's a first inversion dominant chord, just like we saw back here. A 6-5 is a first inversion. It just so happens that that's an E as the lowest note. Now, I told you that I can't even tell what clef this is, but I'm going to pretend that it's a bass clef. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'm going to pretend that it's a bass clef. If I have an E natural in the bass, and then a 6 and a 5, that happens to be this exact chord, E natural, G, B flat, C. Now, I told you had to be diatonic, but it's a little hard to tell with what's going on here. Point is, I'm pretending that's an E natural. Not sure it is, but I have that with a 6-5. That's a first inversion C7 chord. Here's another first inversion chord. I'm not going to worry about what it is since we're not sure about the clefs. Back at triads, this is just a first inversion triad, if you recall. A 6, third is often left out. That's just a first inversion triad. So there's that. If it said 7, if you look back here, if it just says 7, that means it's a dominant 7th chord in root position. So for whatever note that is, there's a dominant 7th chord in root position. Again, this isn't critical. I just want you to see where it came from, and that at one point in time, all this analysis was how musicians played. They weren't actually given notes. They were given, here's a bunch of analysis, figure out what the right note is. I'll tell you what the lowest note is, but you have to figure everything else out. Here's the same thing. George Friedrich Handel was a contemporary to Bach. Same thing. We've got all these little numbers going on. There's a 6, that's a first inversion triad. There's a 6-5 right there. That's a first inversion dominant 7th chord. You get the drift. So don't worry about that too much. I just want you to see there actually is a connection analytically and historically through music. People have been using inversions for specific reasons for centuries. So we have continued to use inversions for a reason. They each sound a little bit different, and you may want to make choices in accordance with how they sound to you. So think about that and watch on for the rest of this particular lecture. It includes lecture time from campus in which there's a more detailed discussion of 7th chords.
We're going to talk about voice leading on the keyboard, which you guys have been doing for a week already. You've talked about it before in MUA. I'm just like pointing out the obvious, making sure there's no question that you guys understand what's going on with this. So obviously in voice leading, it's going to make the progression sound smoother and easier. It's going to make the progression sound smoother, and it will be easier to play. It keeps the chords in a specific, wow, second sentence in and I'm saying specific. Keeps the chords in a particular specific range, and that is a good thing. It's very pleasing to ears generally. We don't want to hear stuff like this. We don't want to hear hopping around like that. You want to hear nice, smooth voice leading. When you use smooth voicing like that, it really does open up possibilities for other more unique voicings and variety that is a little hard to see. That's just one of those things you're going to have to kind of take our word on. It truly does, but it's hard to see right now. So just take my word for that. We're going to get into alterations, extensions, additions, alterations, suspensions later. And when you have smooth voice leading, it allows for like nice little melodic lines when you're doing things like altering a dominant chord, which we'll talk about. Excuse me. But that's the kind of thing we're referring to, and it's a little hard to see at this point in an abstract sense without actually doing it. Each voice, and you guys know what each voice is because originally this was the first instrument. When you lay out a chord, root, third, fifth, each component is referred to as a voice. And you guys, I'm sure you knew that already. But each voice is essentially playing a melodic line that can be embellished, and that's where those nice, colorful, more variety opportunities come in when you move from one to the next. For example, if I go from a C chord in root position to an F chord in second inversion, Let me show you this way. It'll be easier. I get to play with my favorite toy. Okay, so if I'm going from C to F, I don't want to go like this. I went more than a third. Not very good voice leading. If I use good voice leading, I can go. And I can go. See, I put a little melody in the inside there. That's what we're talking about. Make sense? So you can do that with any voice. You know, you have to learn how to make intelligent choices, but that's basically what we're getting at. You can put embellishments when you're moving smoothly. You can put nice little embellishments and interesting points of variety in there. So obviously our goal is to get from one chord to another with the least amount of movement possible. Common guidelines, retain common chord tones. We've done that several times. We've worked through demonstrations of that where G major, GBD. You take the D, move your finger to E, GBE. You went from a G major quality chord to an E minor quality chord. You didn't change the bottom two notes. You moved one note. So that's obviously retaining any common chord tones. Make sure every important voice is sounded. That's what you got to be careful of. Later in the month when we get to more of a bigger handful of seventh chords, I don't require that you use smooth voice leading. For now, it's a requirement because you're only working in triads, and it's a way to get you to get the groove of how smooth voice leading works, because triads are a lot easier. The reason I don't require it with seventh chords is because if you leave out the third of a seventh chord, you don't have a seventh chord anymore. You have a root, a fifth, and an interval of a seventh from the root, but you don't know what kind of chord it is because you have no third. Remember, the third of the chord, root, third, fifth, seventh components, third of a chord, even the triad, root, third, fifth, determines the quality of the chord. If you have no third, you can't tell what you have. So the third is critical. If you're working with seventh chords, obviously, if you don't have the seventh, you don't have a seventh chord. All you have is a triad. Make sense? So when you're inverting, that's when you have to be careful to not screw up and accidentally drop out a crucial component of the chord. Obviously, you already knew you can't move any voice by an interval larger than a third. Doesn't matter, major or minor. A third is the accepted distance. The bass voice has the golden ticket. Bass voice can move by leap. Can go anywhere at once pretty much because it usually plays the roots. And down at the bottom, just for acoustics and, like physical science reasons, if you play a triad down here, can you tell the quality of that triad? It's kind of tough. Yeah, it's major now that I separate it out, but it's muddy down at the bottom. That's why you never clump a lot of voices down at the bottom. It gets too muddy, and generally speaking, if you're playing chords with your left hand and melody with your right hand, the meat and potatoes of where chords are played is generally from like D or E3 up through like C5. You don't want to get too much past there. That's where you're going to put chords that are with close voicings. You can spread them out, and you'll get to this in arranging. But meat and potatoes, playing triads, you want to be kind of between D, E, F3 up to maybe G, A, maybe B4. It's like an octave and a half range. That's where it's going to sound best acoustically based on scientific principles of how sound is produced. That's honestly the reason. But bass voice gets golden ticket. It can hop around because at the bottom things get too muddy if there isn't space. So it can hop around, and we do not mind that. Our ears are not going, I'm not good. Our ears are going, yes, I heard the bass note, and the bass is my friend, because we hear and analyze from the bottom up to decide what kind of chord is being played, what the progression is. Questions? Cool. All right. Another thing we're going to look at is types of motion. This is like a glancing blow, starter, by the way, counterpoint exists kind of deal. How two voices move in relation to each other is called counterpoint. Very simple. Punta, contra, puncta. point against point. Literally, that's where the word counterpoint came from. It just means I'm only looking at two voices, even a full chord of maybe 6 or 7 notes. I'm going to single out two and go, how are they moving in relation to each other when you're talking about motion like this? Now, when you get to bigger pieces of harmony where you got a full chord, you might have several voices moving in one direction and a couple voices moving in another direction, and you can make those kind of comparisons, but you got to crawl before you can run. Counterpoint essentially is just how is this one voice moving in relation to this other voice. So we have 4 types of motion. Similar. Both voices move in the same direction, but not by the exact same interval. It can be used, but only under certain specific conditions, and I'm talking about traditional rules, okay? This is very close in definition and meaning and how it works to parallel motion. Both voices in parallel motion move in the same direction and by the exact same interval. So similar motion, they go in the same direction, but not by the same interval. Parallel, spot on, same interval, same direction. Traditionally, it is not favored. It is a major no-no. Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, all those guys are rolling over in their grave. I see ya. Rolling over in their grave when there's parallel motion. It is a major no-no. It's how you fail counterpoint when you're taking traditional counterpoint classes. It will have a very contemporary sound, and it's done in contemporary music all the time. Power chords, parallel fifths on the outside. They're playing parallel triads, direct parallel motion of identical intervals, taking whole triads and moving them all together in the same direction. So let's just, check the difference real quick. Similar, both voices moving the same, but not by the same interval. C is going down to B. G is going down. That was only a half step. G is going down, but it's going down a fourth to D. Over here, C is going up a perfect fourth to F. E is going up a perfect fourth to A. See the difference? They're very similar. It's really, like I said, music's not hard. It's details that you got to remember. 2 other types of motion left. Oblique motion, that's such a cool word. It simply means that one voice stays in the same spot and the other voice moves in relation to it. So here we go. E sounds again another E. The pitch doesn't change. The top voice, C, is going down a half step to B. So one remained and the other moved. So contrary, da 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 da. The most pleasing sound. Voices move, obviously, contrary, in the opposite direction in relation to where they start. In relation to each other, they move in opposite direction. It is considered the ideal sound and the most pleasing sound, even in contemporary music. Let me be specific about that. Contemporary Western music, which is what, obviously, here in the States we are deep in, right? It is considered the most pleasing. It doesn't matter what style. Doesn't matter traditional, it doesn't matter contemporary. You can get away with the parallel motion in contemporary, but still contrary is the most pleasing for whatever reason. We all just go, that was nice. I got B going up to C by a half step, F going down to E by a half step. It's just coincidence that they're moving by half steps. They don't have to move by the same distance. They simply have to go in the opposite direction. That's all. That's contrary motion. Cool? All right, so let's look at a couple examples. I'm talking about the C. Oh, and remember, when you look at a whole setup like this, bass voice, and they're usually referred to either as first, second, third, fourth voice. Usually when it's this clear that the bass is by itself, it may be first, second, third voice from the top down. Or you actually will see references to this is the tenor, bass voice, tenor voice, alto voice, soprano voice. Top is always soprano. Second from the top is always alto. Third from the top is tenor when you have 4 voices. When you got 5, it gets messy. 5 or more, it gets messy. But we're just looking in simple, and this is called chorale style for obvious reasons. Those are the voices in a chorus or a choir, bass, tenor, alto, soprano. Make sense? So here we go. I'm talking about the soprano and tenor voices. What kind of motion is this? G going to A, C going to C. No, that's oblique because C continued to sound a C again. It remained on the same pitch. G went up to A. Make sense? All right, how about this one? Contrary, in the outside voices, it's usually very pleasing, generally speaking, when the outside voices move in contrary motion. My sense, and I'm not sure it's right, you'll find out in arranging because I'm studying arranging myself at the moment. My sense is when your outside voices are in contrary motion, you can usually get away with a little bit of murder in here because our ears are drawn to the top and the bottom. So correct, that's contrary motion because the G went up to A and the C went down to A. Now they both landed on an octave, and I'm not even going there because that's a whole other set of counterpoint rules that makes you find a corner and a good, have a good twitch over it. But I don't remember those rules, but there are rules about that. Point is, that's contrary motion. Good enough. Moving on. What's this? E and C moving up. Be careful. I have to look at it myself. Nope. Oblique, one stays the same. They both are changing. It's similar because E only went a half step to F. C went a whole step to D. See the difference? And again, this stuff is not difficult. It's just details. What do we got here? That's another similar, right? Because C goes to D, A goes up to D. They're both going up, but not by the same interval. How about this one? Yeah, and the arrows are usually pretty helpful. A is going up to B, D is going down to G, obviously, opposite directions. How about that one? Yep, that one's oblique because the A is remaining at the next chord. A is going up to D there in that voice. Cool. Okay, so I started a little mini seventh chord review yesterday, and I want to go through it in detail today. This is something, an understanding of seventh chords you cannot leave this month without having your head wrapped around it, knowing seventh chords, what they are, how to form them, what they're made of, what to do with them, how they function. All right, so here we go. Did this yesterday. Well, let's do it again. Here's my first tetrachord. Going to put a whole step in between there and do my next tetrachord. Whole, whole, half, right? So here's my triads. You guys know this. We're building snowmen in the key of C. And just want to make sure you guys got a grip on this. I'm in C. What's the quality of the one chord? So I'm going to have a capital Roman numeral. I'm going to call it C, like that. I'm going to skip over, for obvious reasons, to the four chord. What's the quality of the four chord? And I'm only talking triads at the moment, so that's F major, right? Make sense? Going to go on to the five chord for a very similar reason. What's the quality of the five chord? That triad is major. We're calling it a G. Going to go to 2, 3, and 6 now. What's the quality of 2, 3, and 6 chords? Triads in every key. Minor. So here's 2, 3, and 6. Letter name? But you got to say minor. D minor. What's this one? E minor. And what's this one? A minor. And then we have left our poor little red-haired stepchild. What's the quality of the 7 chord, the 7 triad in a major key? Correct. It is diminished. And the name, letter name? B diminished. Right. So there are your triads. You can do those with one eye tied behind your back asleep, right? Let's add seventh chords and stay diatonic just like we did yesterday. What am I going to add and stay diatonic? Right? And what note is that? 7th scale degree? What note? B. I'm staying diatonic. That makes this what chord? Major 7. C, and I have to call it C major 7. So what do we got going on here? We got a major triad and a major 7. I'm going to skip over to the F chord for the same reason. Going to add a 7th. I'm stay diatonic. What's the 7th above this root that I'm going to add? Correct. What's that make the chord? Another major 7. I have to call it F major 7. I'm going to skip this for a reason that I'm going to come back to. But you'd think I should go there, but I'm not going to. There is a difference. Let's go to the 2, 3, and 6. Add a 7th, stay diatonic. 7th above D, staying diatonic is correct. However, what kind of 7th is it from D to S, C? It's a minor 7th, and the triad is minor also. And I'm going to go with the correct rule since I was wrong. It's a minor 2, minor 7. What kind of triad is this? That's a minor triad, and this seventh is a minor seventh. And it's going to be the same structure here, which you may or may not know since it's review time. When I add a seventh and stay diatonic to my E minor triad, what note do I add? D, correct. What's that make the chord? E minor. Whoops, it's there already. Duh. I was going to make it an E minor minor 7, which doesn't exist. Well, there are theoretical descriptions that double the word, and we'll see that in a minute. Still skipping you. You're special. I like you a lot. That's why I'm skipping. I'm saving best for last. Here we go. A minor triad, 6th chord. I'm going to add a 7th, but stay diatonic. What note do I add? G, correct. What's quality of the triad?
Minor.
What's the quality of this 7th?
Minor.
That is a minor 7th. That makes the chord A minor 7. 6 minor 7. We might as well deal with our little red-haired stepchild here. When I add a 7th, what note do I add when I stay diatonic? This one's kind of unique, too. What is this triad? That's a diminished triad. What is the 7th from B to A? It's a minor 7th. Right, so it's a half diminished 7, right? Now, da 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 da. It's time for the star of the show, the dominant 7th chord. When I stay diatonic and add a 7th, what do I do? What note do I add? F. Which makes this what? Dominant 7th, and the name of the letter name is? G7. This, my friends, is our special star of the show. What is the structure of this triad? That is a major triad. What is the structure of this 7th? That's a minor 7th. This is the only chord with that structure. And they're, because everything's formulaic, it's going to happen in every key. You can be in birthday cake major. The 5 chord is going to be a major triad with a minor 7th. No other chord has this structure at all in a major scale, right? Major triad, major 7. Major triad, major 7. Minor triads, minor 7. It's the one, and remember, it's got the leading tone, and I did that wrong. Wrong note. It's got the leading tone. I did it again. Help! Somebody help me. I've got the leading tone, LT, right here, which is B, and I've got the 4th scale degree. And when you construct a major scale, what's the big deal? What does the 4th scale degree and the 7th scale degree have in common in a major scale? They are tritone, but in the structure of the scale, what's the dealio with where the 4th scale degree, how it lays, where it is, and they're the only places where the half steps are in a scale. So they are points of tension in the scale. When you put them in this chord, stacking thirds in our tertian system like we do, we get a tritone, in which, this is why, folks, one of my mantras for the month, aside from, it's a formula, is 7 goes to 8, even though I'm supposed to say 1, and 4 goes to 3, right? And I can't remember, did we resolve tritones like that? Did we mess with resolving tritones like that? Here you go. GBDF, right? There's the B and the F. Leading tone, 4th scale degree. 7 goes to 8, 4 goes to 3. I don't have a 5th in this chord, but what does it imply? What chord? C major from a G7. It's that 5 to 1 motion that's implied. If I played it right, I did. As you know, 5 to 1 is a critical relationship in Western music. Dominant to tonic, really critical. So much so that people are on about how you even got to the dominant. How you got to the dominant is called either dominant preparation or a predominant chord. And there are theses on about how, compositions get to what the predominant chord is and what the dominant preparation. It's a thing because that relationship is so important. But what I want you to see is 5-7 chord is really critical. It's the point of the most tension. If you remember the discussion on functional harmony, that's the point of most tension. And, I'm caught on the edge there, haha. The 7 half diminished chord is related because it's got 3 of the same 4 notes, right? Make sense? However, it doesn't have the same structure. That is the only chord with a major triad and a minor seventh. The others are different combinations. Make sense? All righty. Happy clicky thing. Here we go. So, having said that, let's look at those individual structures real clearly. Here's your